Hello, and welcome to another Frequently Asked Church Questions here at All Saints Episcopal Church in Salt Lake City. I'm the Reverend Mike Mayer Rector, and today we're going to answer the question, what is prayer? Martin Luther famously said, to be a Christian without prayer is no more possible than to be alive without breathing. And while everyone knows that prayer is essential to a life of faith and a life of relationship to the divine, what exactly is prayer? It's interesting, when pushed, most people have an answer, and regardless of the language, the easiest way to sum up that answer is to put it simply as prayer is talking to God. But you know what? That's not the only definition, but it's a good place to start. And so we'll start with that definition. And the assumption that prayer is talking to God does fit neatly into the 5 classic forms of prayer: adoration, petition, intercession, thanksgiving, and oblation. Adoration is anything we do that expresses love or praise to God. It is sometimes referred to as praise or even glory, and there is no shortage of examples of prayer of adoration, and many are expressed in hymns or other sacred music. Petition is the act of asking God for something on our own behalf. Now, humorously, a good example would be the adolescent who prays before a test for an unnatural ability to pass it even though he hasn't studied. But seriously, petition is any request we make to God for ourselves. Intercession is the act of asking God for something on behalf of another. It can include requests for safety, for healing, or for any other kind of support or care for the world or those who live in it. Thanksgiving is akin to adoration. It's like giving praise or love, except that it is specifically the act of giving thanks to God for the good in our lives and for the good in the world. It is the adoption of an orientation towards gratitude and a recognition of the source of all good things. The last of the classical forms of prayer is oblation. Oblation, put simply, is an offering to God. It can take the form of offering one's life in service, or something as simple as offering a candle in a worship service. It can be putting money in the plate. It could be offering support to those in need. But to be clear, oblation is not charity. The goal in oblation is not simply just to give something away or to be a do-gooder. The goal in oblation is to engage God through the act of giving something away. It is, in essence, to give something to God. Now, many definitions of prayer stop with these 5, but if we stop there, we leave out an important dimension of prayer, an important dimension to the life of prayer. Namely, that prayer isn't simply talking to God, but it is also intrinsically about listening to God as well. There are 4 models or modes of prayer that involve being attentive to God's presence in our lives, that aren't particularly focused on what we have to say. They are meditation, reflection, imagination, and creation. Meditation is a spiritual practice that predates Christianity, and it's often associated with Eastern traditions like Buddhism or Hinduism. But meditation as an act of prayer has been a part of the Christian tradition for millennia. 2 examples of Christian meditation are centering prayer, in which we repeat a simple sentence of prayer over and over again, like a mantra, so that we can transcend the noisiness of our lives and listen for the voice of God. The other example in Catholic tradition would be the Rosary. Again, where through the repeated recitation of the Hail Mary, we transcend the specifics of prayer, and the mind and soul are quieted to receive insight and inspiration. Reflection is something that may or may not be prayer, but when it is approached as an act of prayer, it can open us up to insights from the divine. 2 common forms of reflection as prayer are Lectio Divina and self-examination. Both Lectio and self-examination are ancient forms of reflection. Lectio Divina is the practice of reading scripture or other material with the intent of reflecting on it, with the express purpose of listening for the voice of God. Self-examination is the act of applying reflection to one's own life and seeing the places and times when God felt both close and far away. Now, imagination is not something we often associate with prayer, but there are great mystics of the past who saw imagination as a key way of engaging in dialogue with God. Both Ignatius Loyola and Saint Therese of Avila encouraged the use of imagination as an act of prayer. Ignatius, through his spiritual exercises, invites us to read passages of Scripture and to actively imagine ourselves in the scene in a variety of roles. St. Teresa imagines the spiritual life in relation to God as being like a castle at whose center is a fountain of living water, and calls us to take a journey into that castle with all of its hopes and all of its possibilities, and our imagination as a core part of the journey. Now, lastly, is the idea of creation as prayer. Creation is the understanding that any creative act we do can be seen as an act of prayer. If we understand ourselves to be co-creators with God, whether it is a journal entry or a poem or a painting or gardening or some other creative act, we are part of the creative process that God is still engaged in. When we engage our creativity as prayer, then we come to recognize that God is at work in us, and God is at work through us. And what is being created is not just the product of our egos, but synergy, a synergy that comes from the conversation between us and the divine. And so every act of creativity becomes an act of creation and a form of prayer. If we take all of this into account, we can then say that prayer is not simply talking to God, but engaging God with our whole selves in a variety of ways. It is a dialogue between us and the source of our being. It is an opportunity to deepen our understanding and to touch the sacred. So if you've ever wondered what prayer is, I hope this has helped to answer the question. Thanks so much for watching.